how do you make sure the audience doesn't check out after 5 minutes? I mean, they're like, this movie's about the guy who killed John Lennon. I'm out.
Obviously everyone wants to know why, right? Everyone wants to know why this guy did what he did. And there's no quick answer.
Welcome back to another episode of Storytelling Deconstructed. Today we have a really special episode because we are talking about the unique and fascinating movie Chapter 27 about John Lennon's killer, Mark David Chapman, in the 3 days leading up to the killing, the famous killing that happened in New York City. It's a real hidden gem, a true auteur movie that really went for it. And is incredible in a lot of ways. And it's such a special episode because we're going to be doing a new format wherein we're going to be talking to the writer and director of the film, Mr. Jarrett Schaefer. We've got him in the studio today. And by studio, I mean my kitchen. And we're going to be talking to him about the thought process that went into writing such a unique and brilliant script. And we are also joined by recurring guest, friend of the show, titan of industry, Hollywood showrunner, Mr. Matt Graham, who was nice enough to set this whole thing up. Welcome back, Matt, and welcome, Jarrett.
Thanks so much. Glad to be here.
Thanks for having us on, guys.
All right, let's make a podcast. And before we get started, I do just want to say really quick, if you're listening to this, you really should watch this movie before you listen. The whole movie is available for free on YouTube. Just search Chapter 27. I mean, you should pay for it. You should go to a paid platform and pay for the movie, but it is available for free. So watch the movie, watch it 4 times. It's fascinatingly deep and complex and worth the watch. Wherever you're listening to this, the link will be in the description, and that'll give you the context for all the interesting stuff we're going to be talking about here. All right.
Please clear up right now the $1 million question, which I'm sure you know what that is, which is the actor who plays John Lennon.
Oh, well, there's kind of that was the one I wasn't expecting.
Oh.
Right at the beginning, I do want to say that an army of people helps you make these things that then go on and get referred to as your movie and my movie and this and that.
Sure.
And just, from all my wonderful cast, my wonderful crew, all my producers, the, Peace Arts that paid for the movie, I just want to acknowledge that up front that I had just a tremendous amount of help, and I got to work with so many talented people, pretty much all of them taking a pay cut of some sort to work on a micro budget movie in New York City and things like this. But so in answer to your question, there are so many beyond, bizarre stories. And this is one of them. The actor who plays John Lennon is a British actor. I think he's in Titanic.
Yeah, he's in Titanic.
He is in Titanic. And his name is Mark Lindsay Chapman. That is his name. And he was also set to play John Lennon in the 80s for a TV show that Yoko Ono was producing. And he had the part. And then when Yoko found out about his name, she thought it wasn't a good idea. And, Mark Lindsay Chapman, the actor who plays John Lennon, told me the story and said they completely understood and it makes sense to him. And it is beyond bizarre. But, I heard just someone told me that there was going to be an actor going on tape for me to play John Lennon whose name was Mark Chapman. And I was like, well, that's beyond weird. And there was this really famous John Lennon impersonator. I can't even remember his name, but I wanted him and he wanted quite a bit of money. And so I was still like, yeah, come on, let's do this. And people were like, no. I think my memory says $1 million. I don't know if that's right or not, but he wanted quite a bit of money. And so it was just not going to happen. So I remember being in my office in New York and I put in the tape of the John Lennons and I was doing stuff, returning emails. I don't know what I was doing and just like kind of looking at them, kind of looking away, and all of a sudden the Mark Lindsay Chapman audition started. And he's got that like Cockney, like, South London blood in the streets kind of like, bit of a working class, I don't know, was it brogue or something? That would be Scottish, right? But he's the real deal.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I always said I didn't want to look alike. I wanted to feel alike. You know, and that was Mark Lindsay Chapman. And like, I didn't know it was, I didn't catch his, you know what I mean? And I was like, oh my gosh, this guy's got something. This could work, you know? And then again, when it starts, when a good idea is in front of you, you know it, you know, just like boiling it down and getting rid of all the extra flashbacky stuff. I was like, oh, who is this guy? And then I found, oh my, this is Mark Lindsay Chapman. And then I had to go, you know, across the next office and tell my producers, so listen, this movie that we're not supposed to make about this subject we're not supposed to talk about, that's super hypersensitive and everyone's going to be offended and hate it from the beginning. I kind of want to cast Mark Lindsay Chapman and smart John Lennon. And like, yeah, I understand why people don't like it and think it's stunt and everything. But I mean, I'm not going to not cast the best actor available to me. We're just not going to do that. And I talked to Mark Lindsay. I was like, hey, do you want me to like credit you as something else, or how do you want to be credited? And he's like, Mark Lindsay Chapman. That's my fucking name, you know? And so that was that. I mean, and you know, John Lennon famously said, we're all Christ and we're all Hitler. And when I would pitch this movie in things, I would say that line and then say, you know, so to an extent, we're all John Lennon and we're all Mark Chapman. This is before even knowing that a Mark Lindsay Chapman was going to audition, let alone play it. It wasn't, you know what I mean? So this idea that, you know, we're capable of great things, we're capable of bad things, you know, Mark Chapman is not the devil himself, and John Lennon is not a total angel who never did any wrong, you know? So
that's really interesting. Yeah, that's super interesting. And just the last thing I wanted to ask you.
Well, hold on, Matt. Before you move on, let me just a quick side question on that one, which is that did that factor in? Because I thought it was a really interesting and totally correct decision to almost never show John Lennon's face. Was that just purely a function of the fact that you got an actor who didn't look a ton like him, or was that planned from the beginning?
See, I was thinking about this today. I put the movie on. I just wanted to look at the credits to remember people's names a bit more and make sure. But I ended up looking at the whole movie. Sure, Mark Lindsay Chapman does not look like the spitting image of John Lennon, but this image of John Lennon in 1980 in December does not look like the spitting image of John Lennon that we know from the covers of albums and you know, the mop top Beatlemania thing. So he's got the ducktail hair and the glasses, and like, you know, if you look at the frame, the still frame of that photo of John, he looks a lot like, I mean, both those actors. Like, I was really struck by like how much Jarrett looks like Chapman in some instances when he bends to shoot and he gets the fatter chin a little bit. It was like, ooh, that is really close. But yes, you know, the fact that like, the people don't look at that wardrobe and that hairstyle and those glasses and go, oh, there's John Lennon. You do have to kind of reduce it a little bit. And the big thing that Mark Lindsay Chapman had was the voice. So you do hear a lot of like, you know, we have all his lines, you know, and he's got the gait, you know, he's got a lot of good feel-alike stuff that the other guys were trying to be John Lennon. And Mark Lindsay Chapman is a character. The actor Mark Lindsay Chapman is a character and a, what's the word for a raconteur, a storyteller, a wild one. And I adore him. I want, you know, big thank you to Mark Lindsay Chapman for playing John Lennon for me. He was the perfect role. He's still, you know, I would never. This is certainly not a regret. But yeah, it does. You know. Probably, if another actor had played him, it would have been reduced for other reasons because their performance wouldn't have been as feel-like, you know what I mean? So you got to work with everything. Sure. But I never for 1 second in any of the footage looked at that and thought like, oh, I should have got someone. I think he's just the absolute, like, he is rock and roll. Mark Lindsay Chapman, the actor.
Yeah. No, I mean, I thought he totally captured the vibe. Anyway, did you want to keep?
So my big sort of question is, you know, obviously the concept. Just talking about the script here, right? The concept for this story is extraordinary because, like you just described, it's the 3 days before he shoots John Lennon outside the Dakota. And conceptually, it's obviously very similar to The Catcher in the Rye, obviously. That goes without saying, because a book which I absolutely love, by the way. So you've done this extraordinary kind of mirroring of both stories together, except that yours has, rather like The Catcher in the Rye, has this just absolutely definitive end. As you just said, it's a character who wants to shoot John Lennon. Now, having just rewatched the film, what I really want to know is, what was your intention towards how we should feel about Mark David Chapman, the character? Because obviously it's a super controversial subject, and that's a whole other thing. I know there was probably a lot of resistance to portraying him, and that's everything that you read about the film on the internet speaks to that. But what I'm interested in is just as a writer, what was your intention towards how we should feel about him, the character?
Well, it's obviously a tragedy, in
more ways than one. Yeah.
Right. I mean, the idea of feeling for a villain, here's this guy that everybody hates, and can we care about him? Can we understand him a little bit? Can we know that? Can we see it in ourselves, see it in other people? And, when I watch, the end of the film where Mark Chapman murders John Lennon, a lot of the first times that I see it and stuff, it's like, oh my God, he just shoots him. He just points a gun in his back and shoots him. And that's how John Lennon died. And that's horrible. And then, you see it some more and you look at it the other way and you're like, Mark Chapman just ruined his life. And you feel for the murderer. And to see both of those. The idea of, wearing someone else's outfit, walking in someone else's shoes, and this it's usually so black and white. And I'm sure you remember Drew Casper talking about shades of gray, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Drew Casper was one of my favorite / most scared of lecturers at USC.
Now, question, not to, I hope that's a good answer, but just the idea of, and I love the movie Elephant. That was probably the Columbine, but not Columbine. That was probably my favorite movie at the time of making this movie. And I always talked about, I want to make my Elephant as, chapter 27 was this, and talking about story and deconstructing storytelling, looking at Elephant, it's kind of plotless in a way. You don't, I mean, I'm sure if you gentlemen looked at it, you could find those markers, and I'm sure there exist and stuff. And as much as I love, movies that like The Firm or anything else that are like buy the ticket, buy the popcorn, sit in the theater, and it's very comfortable and it's very exciting. I also love movies like Elephant. And Jerry was made a year later. That's a little less known.
Excellent film.
Excellent movies. And
I love it.
Right. I'm there is a complication, and there is, he in coming back to chapter 27, it's so the plot goal is twofold. Get John Lennon's autograph, but really it's I want to kill John Lennon. And then the theme goal is, it's like suicide by celebricide, essentially. I want to end my life. I want to become The Catcher in the Rye. I want to become Holden Caulfield. I don't want to go to jail, but whatever. I don't really want to be a human anymore. I don't really want to be alive. It's too hard. And Mark Chapman has got to, his journey is psychological, where he's got to convince himself to do this. He's got to work himself in a state. He says in the coffee shop scene with Lindsay Lohan, he says, the human mind is an incredible thing. It can do anything. Once its mind is made up, it can do anything. You have to say it. You have to make it in your mind and you decide to. So that is the journey. We're watching a train wreck in slow motion. We're watching someone throw their life away. Which, I mean, we're also watching someone murder someone else. That's not to be ignored, And it was just such rich territory for me with, this is sort of the first instance of celebricide. and for even that, so that like 2005, 6, 7, this was a very telling time for celebrity in terms of like your Paris Hiltons and your Lindsay Lohans and your Us Weeklies. And if you saw a celebrity do something wrong, you could call whatever, and that would be reported in the paper. And we sort of had this like ownership thing happening with celebrity then. And in addition to that, there was all the Catcher in the Rye stuff. There was all the Wizard of Oz stuff. The record, the John Lennon record, is called Double Fantasy. There was mental health stuff. There was psychosis, and it was just as interesting as can be to be with this character, in these moments and stuff.
So yeah, I'm glad, Matt, I'm glad you asked this question. I had the same question. It's like, if you told me, if I got this movie as a writing assignment, I'd spend at least 30 minutes after either going like, oh my God, this is going to be the hardest movie to write. There are so many challenges going in this movie. Only one of them being that you're writing a villain. And how do you make sure the audience doesn't check out after 5 minutes? I mean, they're like, this movie is about the guy who killed John Lennon. I'm out, right? Fuck this guy. That alone is such an overwhelming challenge. And one thing that was interesting is the way that our sympathy for him evolved throughout the movie. Obviously, like his inability to have any sort of normal interaction with, Lindsay Lohan's character and stuff like that. That breeds some amount of like sympathy for him. And we find ourselves halfway through the movie, certainly not necessarily agreeing with him, but understanding at least a little bit where he's coming from, which I'm sure was part of your goal. And then I remember what I felt like was an important, I don't necessarily want to call it a turning point, but it was a clicking moment for me where something changed a little bit. And it was the moment where he finally does have an interaction with John, and John Lennon signs his record, and he could not be nicer, right? And he says the thing that I can't imagine any celebrity's ever said in history, which is, do you want anything else? Is there anything else I can give you? And he's like lost. He's like stunned and like lost for words. He's like, nah, I think that's it. And at that moment, you're like, oh, wait, yeah, John Lennon, not the villain that Mark David Chapman has kind of convinced himself that he is. I'm kind of rambling here, but I guess my question is just like, maybe can you talk maybe a little more specifically about how, I'm guessing you were probably thinking in these terms, like, when in the movie are we supposed to maybe sympathize with him a little more? Were you thinking about that? Was that intended to be that a little bit of a turning point where we start to go, wait a second, maybe this guy's perceptions of reality are like really off?
Well, sure. Yeah, meeting John Lennon and getting his autograph and him being nice. And that's again, there's this representation of people in the media where, you take things out of context. And like, I'm sure John Lennon probably did say, I'm not going to walk on water again. I'm not going to divide the loaves and fishes for the masses again in that Playboy article that Chapman read. But who knows what the lead in the full context are. And like, maybe if I had been a Beatle, I would say similar things, if not worse. It's, there's empathy there and understanding. And like this, like, Chapman even says it where he's like, John Lennon's got to be the most famous person in the world right now. And I've never seen him before, like we don't know the reality of these humans, and yeah, the interesting thing that comes up to me when I think about sympathy and so you just by nature are not rooting for the Chapman character, but definitely kind of following him, and you get kind of imbued with him and he's the lead and stuff like that. And then when he has the mini freak out on Paul, when Paul says he doesn't sound like he's from Hawaii, he's like, why would you ask me that? Why would you say that like that? You go, oh no, you're going to get caught. But you want him to get caught. You want someone to stop him, Right. And it also brings to mind that when Gloria Chapman, Mark's wife, found out that he had shot John Lennon.
Yes, I want to ask about this.
She remembers thinking that she was proud of him, that she was happy for him, that he finally did something, that he finally accomplished what he wanted to accomplish. Yeah, so this is dark, twisted territory that's not... And that was Drew Casper's problem with all movies, that the white hats were gleaming and the black hats were twirling their mustaches, And I never really had as big a problem. I understood why people didn't want this movie to get made or whatever. But there's, in terms of like cinema having, you think of Irreversible and Matt, what is that Solo movie where
Solo,
yes.
yeah, which is absolutely apparently unwatchable.
Right. So, what is the Nina Simone quote about artists have a responsibility to reflect the times, and it was something within me. I mean, I was talking to a playwright friend last night. I wanted to talk about the movie a little bit to get ready for this, and like I even confessed, there's something of a Mark Chapman with me where I wanted to do something to get famous, and that is like, I didn't shoot John Lennon, but I made a movie about shooting John Lennon, to like. I see that element, you know what I mean? And this was, and it still exists, of course, but this was a time when like everyone was like hustling to get their moment of fame and to make their film or whatever, and I was definitely a part of that. And yeah, I identify with Chapman quite a bit, just in terms of like self-harm. Making bad decisions, knowingly making bad decisions, trying to talk myself out of like, doing bad things. And I mean, I don't think about him too much anymore, but I used to think about him all the time. And it is, putting the, tying yourself to the mast and sailing close to the devil. That's, you've got to take a look, the ugly face has got to look in the mirror a little bit, to just course correct.
And you spoke earlier about how the character opens saying, "I'm not going to tell you those things about me that you want to know." Like the moment where you discover that in his backstory, there's things. How did you use that from a dramatic point of view? How did you use that to your advantage? Because traditionally, that would make it harder for the audience to have empathy with Chapman. And if this was a TV series, we'd probably have 6 or 7 episodes devoted to his life, young, and then it would climax with him shooting him. So that's a really interesting decision that I want to hear more about.
Obviously everyone wants to know why, right? Everyone wants to know why this guy did what he did, and there's no quick answer. And I feel like any attempt at that, like you see it all the time in movies where the Little League game, the little kid drops the fly ball, and then when he looks up, he's in the, meeting with his boss, getting yelled at for like dropping the job. And it's like, oh, so because he did this, now he turned into
the Moneyball moment.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Well, it's practically untenable and inexcusable for like a story meeting in development hell to not do this in your movie, to not have,
exactly.
It was quite the thing for a long time, and you'll still see it, like the missed fly ball. That was even Vincent Robert. I think that is his.
Oh, that's another name I haven't heard for a while.
And I probably wouldn't have been able to get away with it if it hadn't been in the Catcher in the Rye. If that line about I'm not going to tell you that David Copperfield didn't exist, and then I could use that and pull from that to overdetermine my intentions to say, well, we're doing this because of that. And the whole movie is lined up with these synchronicities, so we're the synchronicity between the novel and the story is just one of the most wonderful things about this film.
Yes.
It's so impressive when you look at it from a,
it was such a stroke of genius just to like the killing the 2 birds with one stone of like doing the 3 days in New York, how it perfectly mirrors the book and it makes production easier. It's like, that is such a genius.
Did you consciously conceive of the ebb and flow of us having empathy for Mark David Chapman as the drama of the film? Because on the first day, it seems pretty, I don't want to say black and white, but it seems clear that we're supposed to root for him because he makes the point that everyone's phony. And there seems to be the lining up of coincidences that make him seem correct, where there's because it seems when he arrives in New York, he doesn't have the initial intention of actually killing John Lennon. He's here to worship at the altar. But it's when he reads the Playboy magazine article and realizes this guy is totally, he's debauched. He's totally lost touch with the image that people had of him in the 60s as like this messenger of peace. But then as the film goes on, so my point being, on that first day, the audience's interests kind of align with the assassins. But as we go to the second and the third day, his narrative gets complicated when, for instance, he hires the hooker to sleep with him, which that seemed like a parallel with Catcher in the Rye, because he wanted to be like Holden Caulfield. And then on the third day, I didn't know he had a wife. I thought he was single. So you post hoc hate him for hiring that hooker. It's like he commits infidelity. So it's dude, you're a phony. You're pointing the finger, but you're the phony. So is that something you were consciously thinking about, having the ebb and flow of empathy over the 3 days?
That's what I was trying to answer my earlier question and failed to articulate. Yes, great. Thank you for articulating that, Erik.
Sure. I mean, that's always in conversation, but remember, Mark Chapman himself doesn't know if he wants to kill John Lennon or not. I mean, he brought a gun to New York. He went to the YMCA and unpacked it and put it in his pocket and went to the Dakota. But throughout the film, and especially at the end, he's trying to convince himself not to do it. He's of two minds. He's trying to convince himself to do it and not to do it. So he's ebbing and flowing himself, and we don't want him to do it either. There is that element of that Gloria Chapman, his wife, was talking about with, we want our hero to succeed, even if it's an anti-hero. There's this kind of weird impulse within us, sort of a thing, where, my friend Ron Byers, another film school name, when he, I think, probably read in the script version that scene where he's fighting with Paul, he had that reaction that I talked about, oh no, don't get caught. Oh no, wait, I want you to get caught, Yeah, I don't know how consciously I think about the audience and how they're going to feel, because so many people feel so many different ways. Some people won't even watch this movie, and I understand that completely. And, some people maybe root for Chapman in a way that I'm not even comfortable with, but I do think about the character, and I think about myself as the audience of one. And I want to be true to myself as a writer and true to the material and everything. But I am bad in the sense of the what do they call it? Like test screening things, like, so we sort of lose empathy for Mark when he yells at Jude and says she's phony. And but no, that's a great notion that we don't know that he cheats on his wife until after the fact.
Right. Is that detail true? If it was, did he do it to be like Holden? I mean, what's interesting, Holden doesn't do it in the book. He hires the hooker and then doesn't do it.
Right. Well, that's another element of phoniness that, Mark, and also Holden doesn't shoot anybody. Holden is very nonviolent. He wants to save children. He doesn't want to hurt anybody at all. I think he has some anger for the people who had written "fuck you" on the graffiti, and he maybe talks about shooting them or doing something violent. But and there is this angst within Holden Caulfield, but he's certainly not gonna shoot anybody in the back. So that's not in keeping with the book. The book's about being a protector.
Right. And this gets into, because you brought up the dramatic question of the movie, which is essentially, why did he do this? I think Cody's going to have a parallel question about a story technique you use, which is, well, I'll save that for later. But because you could have written this movie about any of the other assassinations that came before. Sometimes John Lennon's assassination is grouped with that of JFK, RFK, Malcolm X, MLK, just because he was an icon of the 60s. But it came way after. And so my question is, do you think John Lennon's assassination was different than those other ones that came before? And if so, how and why did that catch your fascination?
Well, it's not that John Lennon wasn't a political figure. He very much was. So to say that RFK and JFK and Martin Luther King are political figures, which makes them different than John Lennon was very much a political figure and increasingly a political figure in that time for all kinds of movements, champion of the people, power to the people, women's movement, stuff like that. But to me, the big difference was that Chapman was a fan. You know, in terms of other assassinations, the one that compels me is the Gianni Versace one or the Selena one, where they are killed by people who love them. And that was the compelling, you know, I know that Lindsay was actually in the movie about RFK. That was what she had done right around the same time as Chapter 27. And, you know, I don't know a tremendous amount, but no one ever talks about those people loving the person that they shot. You know, and that's I think a compelling dynamic. You know, I mean, I don't think Lee Harvey Oswald, or as you know, Gary Oldman portrays him in JFK, loved and worshipped and was disappointed by JFK. You know, and that's the dynamic here. That Mark had this wonderful, you know, thing that he thought belonged only to him, and it changed, or he perceived it as changing, or the people who wrote about it and showed about it created a change, or you know what I mean? And his understanding of this experience of a person that he never met was where he decided to place his anger, which has almost probably nothing to do with Beatlemania and the breakup of Beatles and the fact that John lives in a very fancy thing. But yeah, it's that suicide by cop, except it's suicide by making this real bad decision where, hey, now I don't have to live my life anymore.
Right. Because earlier you used the specific term where you said this was one of the first this is the first celebricide. And
right.
One of the differences that I really felt with this film, because all of those figures in the 60s that were killed in their time, they were extraordinarily relevant and were perhaps on the verge of achieving power in that time. Whereas, because it would be one thing if Mark David Chapman kills John Lennon, like, in the aftermath of Abbey Road. But he didn't do that. I mean, he would have been too young. But he waited until John Lennon was really, I mean, he was still a cultural figure, but with the exception of a few albums, he sort of ascended to just like sagehood and wasn't active in the culture in the same way. So my point being, the murder seemed kind of pointless. Unless that moment in the movie where he opens The Catcher in the Rye and writes to Holden and signs it as Holden himself, and he wrote, "This is my statement." And it's almost like the pointlessness of the murder is the statement. And maybe this is a moment where this wasn't something you were thinking about, but this was something that really resonated with me, especially in connection to our modern times, because those words could be the motto of any of these mass shooters that we've seen in the last decade. In some ways, Mark David Chapman invented that archetype and put it into the culture and is like a cultural hero to like the Sandy Hook shooter or the Pulse nightclub shooter, or pick any of them. And it's almost like he put a new archetype into the culture. And it was that was one of the things that fascinated me the most about this film. I don't know if anyone else felt that way.
How relevant would you say? Obviously, this is subjective, but how relevant was John Lennon in 1980? He was still a big musician, right? And
he'd taken a break. He'd taken a break to be a dad and to be a house husband, which I think is a term that he coined. And then the Double Fantasy record had just come out. He just released a new album. So, you know, he came out of retirement and was making music again. And Beautiful Boy is a gorgeous song that's on that record. I don't think Watching the Wheels is on that song, but they're Just Like Starting Over. Just Like Starting Over was a hit. I don't know if it was number one or whatever, but it's a great song and it's a hit and it's on Double Fantasy. So he was sure relevant as ever. I'm sure that Double Fantasy was doing as well, very well, probably on Billboard and everything else. And I do agree with you, Erik. I see what you're saying about it, the killing itself being the statement, and this kind of like, violent public acts as art, for lack of a better term, or as statement, is a thing that perhaps originates with Chapman and the murder of John Lennon. Also, not to be ignored in terms of John Lennon being relative in 1980. If you read that book, John Lennon and the FBI Files, he was meeting with a lot of, the Abby Hoffmans and the Jerry Rubins and things of this nature. I can't speak too much on that, but I know that in terms of like having influence and political power in that way, that's what the John Lennon and the FBI Files is about. But I should say that was sort of the book that was the least involved. To me, it was a very small story. It was a stage play kind of a thing that was very about humanity and humans, and kind of less about, whatever issue. I remember one of our producers was always talking about frustration with like Vietnam War era stuff. And I'm not saying that is involved or not involved, but in terms of the movie that I wrote and I wanted to make, it was almost a microcosm where it could be anybody, and sure, this is a guy who was in the biggest band in the world and everything, but you really boil it down to someone murdering someone that they loved who didn't really want to do that, who wanted to talk himself out.
The last point I just want to make on this topic is, because one of the other things Mark David Chapman changed in terms of assassins, if you look up pictures of the famous assassins of the 60s, Lee Harvey Oswald, Jack Ruby, Sirhan, James Earl Ray, they look like assassins. That's exactly the picture I would imagine an assassin looking like. Whereas Mark David Chapman, he's not the type of guy who you would think would have it in them to do something like that. And that's that's perhaps what's most frightening about it, is he looks more like a normal guy. And he looks more like the people who have committed these types of crimes over the last 10 to 15 years. And that may have been uncomfortable for a lot of people to realize. It's like, because if you're writing a movie about Lee Harvey Oswald, he's become this sort of mythic figure that seems removed from our like sense of normalcy. But Mark David Chapman, you can't say that in a lot of ways.
Erik, before Jarrett answers that, can I just pick you up on a point of fact?
Lay it on me.
Are you saying that Lee Harvey Oswald is an assassin? Because many people would disagree with you.
Oh, well.
There's a can of worms.
There's a can of worms. Anyway, sorry.
I
just had to do that.
Perhaps I've drinking the Kool-Aid. Sure, fair enough.
I just had to do that.
Maybe in the next 10 years, I will come out and say, that was a wrong framing and I apologize.
Well, it's interesting because if you go to the JFK Museum in Dallas, there's actually a whole section. I've been there, obviously.
I've been there too.
Right?
The sixth floor.
Do you remember there's a whole section on the 6th floor there that's devoted to modern theories about the killers of Kennedy?
It used to just be a paragraph. I mean, I grew up in Texas, and when people would come to visit, that was one of the places that they wanted to go, the 6th floor. So I've been there multiple times.
Wow.
And my first time remembering it, it was just a paragraph in the bottom corner of one of the things. So so to be sure, speaking of a cultural narrative kind of framework, Lee Harvey Oswald assassin, fine. Those two words are connected. But the billboard about what really happened is getting more text on it every day, I guess,
There's a whole wall of that Matt Graham coming out right here on Storytelling Deconstructed as a JFK conspiracy theorist.
Listen, I'm sorry. All I'll say on that subject is I worked with Oliver Stone for 5 years. Okay.
Let me riff on Erik's question a little bit, because I think this is going in a really fascinating direction.
This is going in quite a fascinating direction.
Because so I want to just add to that a little bit, because part of what was also really fascinating about this personality and the way that you explored it was that not to get too philosophical here, but obviously there's the whole Nietzschean idea of the death of God, and we have to now after the death of God, we have to make our own meaning, and we don't have these old structures of religion and stuff to give meaning to our lives. And and then there's the whole Jung idea of like it's impossible, and he goes, well, it's impossible to make your own meaning. And part of what was so interesting about this guy is this is the story of a guy trying to make his own meaning and do it in a unique way. And when Erik talks about setting up archetyping and setting a precedent, the assassinations that came before were to serve a political purpose. It's like, we need to take out, RFK because he's like important and politically, and not that John Lennon wasn't important politically, but that was not the motive here. The motive was, this is meaningful to me. I'm living up to something, to an idea, an ideal that I have in my mind, and I'm embodying that by doing this. I'm cleansing the world of phoniness, etc. And so, that's part of what makes us sympathize with this character so strongly, at least insofar as we do, when maybe we are inclined to not want to, because it's like, holy shit, this is the guy really living the hero's journey. He's really going for it in a way that a lot of protagonists don't. If you're watching a movie about like, I want to get the girl, and like, can he get the girl at the end? Like, that's the question. That is a easy framework for a way to have meaning in your life. It's something that's handed to you culturally. Not a lot of characters kind of come up with their own meaning-making structure from scratch. And when you see a character do that, it's kind of like, whoa. And so I guess what I'm getting at, we could get into the specifics, and we should, about how you did that and how you showed that. But I think something I was tracking throughout the whole movie is this self-mythologization process and it escalates and escalates throughout the movie until finally at the end he signs the book as Holden Caulfield, and that's kind of the final blow, I guess, or however you want to articulate the apotheosis of that journey. So, big question. I'm kind of going on for a while here, but
fascinating, wonderful.
Yeah, but
sharp as can be.
Can you speak to that and how? I'm sure this was maybe in different terms, but I'm sure you were thinking along these lines to some extent. How were you it's a big question, so let's start broad, and maybe we can start to get more specific as we, but talk about your thinking on that.
You're absolutely right, where there is a kind of death of everything. And in terms of serial killing or violent acts or mass shooting as art, there is kind of this artistic statement thing where you shoot John Lennon, which is what Mark Chapman was the big compulsion, in addition to ending his own life and not having to worry about paying rent. I think one of the early seeds that Jack Jones wrote a beautiful book called Let Me Take You Down, which is credited in the opening credits, and one of the chapters that's not doesn't make the film or whatever. Chapman's up late at night. He's married. He's not in bed with his wife. He's isolating, and he opens Sgt. Pepper's, and there's that big yellow inlay photograph where they're in the neon army suits or whatever. And he says, that was the moment. That was the moment when I knew I was going to kill him, But he obviously can't do it alone. It's very hard to kill someone. It's very hard to destroy your life. It's not like he ran away or tried to make a murder that he didn't get caught. It didn't make the movie, but there's a line where the doorman, Jose, says, just get out of here, just go. And Mark says, well, where would I go? He has to get the end of it. He has to take this path now. He can't go. He doesn't want to go live his life. But he was pulling at multiple things. He prays to Satan at one point.
Right.
He has some demon characters that are barely mentioned. Leela and Dobar are the names of the demons that he was in contact to. He did praying exorcism, kind of in what do you call it when you channel a demon at home in Hawaii. And then there's also a pulling from Holden Caulfield and this I'm going to end phoniness thing. He's self-creating psychosis to work himself into a state where he can disconnect from reality and his true self, and the fact that he needs to take care of himself, and he's in a human body, he's got stuff to do in order to, in that moment, fire. And you don't know that he is praying to the devil, but he is praying to the devil at the end, where he says, if you give me the opportunity, I will do it. And to me, that is, and it's again that breaking point, all of several little breaks all the way, where he's committing, he's recommitting, he wants to quit, he recommits, and that's kind of the final break when he he prays to the devil, asks for the opportunity, says, if you give me the opportunity, I will do it, and backs into the corner and waits as a gargoyle and will not leave until he sees John Lennon again. But yeah, it is an anti-hero's journey. It is like recreation of the self and of the life and an abandonment to the, there's this, you guys would have to tell me who it is, but in terms of really boiling stories down to like the ultimate crystallization, it's initiation, separation, return. I think about that all the time. Like in like, you pick the movie The Firm, right? Initiation, you get into the firm. Separation, oh my God, I'm working with a corrupt firm. Return, you go back to humanity, and you get the the character who played Pollock to help you out, the FBI guy, to like return you to humanity. But you never did before changed, right? So initiation. Mark brings a gun to New York, to where John Lennon lives, goes to the Dakota, the home of the great and powerful, to see the man behind the curtain, right? The other side of the rainbow, Wizard of Oz. Separation, this journey. He's away from his life. He's away from him. He's away from, paying rent, living the life. And then, when he shoots, nothing happens. He tries to start a smile. He tries to make it this new wonderful thing that he accomplished. And then Yoko screams and his smile cuts off. Return. It's not fun. It didn't work out. You've got to go back and you've got to be Mark Chapman in a little box forever. It's not, and that's what the final title card says about him, oscillating between thinking he's Holden Caulfield and like being very hyper religious. I remember there's a part in the Jack Jones book where he talks about needing to, God, is it okay if I make the soup? And then God would give me a sign that it's okay to make this is someone who didn't want to be themselves and was doing everything they could to not be themselves. And even for years after the murder, was still doing everything they could. I mean, how could you? And one of the Chapman talks about, like, it's shooting someone in the back and having to see, that's horrible. I mean, I'm not saying, of course, being murdered is horrible and being shot in the back is horrible, but it's also horrible to do that and to see that,
that was a great choice to, when the moment of the murder happened, only show Mark David Chapman's face.
Yes.
Yeah. That a lot of people have wanted to. Yeah.
You don't often see the light bulb go off in someone's brain where the decision happens right then, I'm going to murder this person, and then they do it.
So in other words, when he shoots him, from what you're saying, that's essentially, he thinks that's going to be his moment of salvation, his return. But actually it's truly his moment of damnation.
Right. Because the fantasy's over. Right. And the
fantasy's over. Because and that's what the Yoko screaming.
It's a reality.
And this is a guy who just couldn't face up to who he was.
Yeah.
He just couldn't accept himself.
Yeah.
He couldn't live in his own skin.
Hey, I have the same problem. I definitely, I didn't shoot anyone in the back, but I definitely I empathize with, it's hard being a human. One of my dear friends, I mean, it's not a unique, original insight, but I think of her, Nikki is her name, but yeah, it's hard being a human.
One of that's really fascinating.
It's extremely difficult.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think we can all agree on that.
Amen, brother.
I think everybody's feeling that these days.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's I mean, a lot of this movie, it felt so relevant. It felt so relevant.
This is such a wonderful double click 15 years later to be able to unpack it like this. It's really touching, because I could never for the longest time, the tiny bit of really good reviews, better than good reviews. There's a lot of people, not a lot. That's the point. There's like, most of the reviews are overwhelmingly negative, but there was, like a 10% that didn't just like the movie. That said, this is really, and I could never hear that. I was like, why are they lying to me about my movie being good or something? But getting so many years on it and like watching it again and seeing how much there is to pull from it,
I think
Thank you in short.
Yeah, I think this movie should, I say should, like I can make this happen. It should shoot up into cultural relevance, because I think people may now be ready to really dig down and try and understand the dark motives that someone has, because it's become necessary. In other eras of history, we are sort of been able to push these to the dark recesses of society. It's like, I don't want to think about that. I don't want to know what brings a person to do these types of things. But jumping off what Cody brought up, in terms of him kind of forming his own mythology and using The Catcher in the Rye as and the Beatles and the Bible as his like launching off point. Well,
can I jump in really quick, Erik? Because are you going to change the subject?
No, I'm not changing the subject. Here, I'll let you finish. I'm sorry, I cut you off.
Yeah, let me just add one thing really quick, and then obviously you can take it from there. Because one really interesting decision that feels like it's tied directly to that is that, like, if I had set out to write this movie, my instinct would have been that a big part of the arc would have been the turn from his perspective on Lennon. So, the starting the movie as he's a fanboy and he worships him, and obviously ends the movie, and that transition would have been a big part of what I spent time doing and easing into that. You didn't do that. That transition happens very fast in the early part of the movie, and the majority then is spent on going through with it, and which I thought was a really interesting decision and was not intuitive to me, but now I get it. I mean, after thinking about it, when I first saw it, I was like, I don't get that. Now I get it, and it's a really interesting choice because it makes the movie about okay, I have my values, I know what I believe in. Can I live up to them? And so his success is, I mean, this is just kind of, I guess, riffing off. This is why I kind of wanted to add this. Is just riffing off a little bit what we were talking about earlier. But his success then, when he does successfully live up to his values, is obviously everybody else's loss. And so, I mean, I guess my question is just that seems like when you did you intentionally not want to spend time on, how did you come to such an unintuitive decision? Was it intuitive for you?
No, like I said, I spent years writing scenes to show that transformation. Yeah, I had the same impulse. I have a question though. When you say that I solidified the impulse and how he feels early on, what moment are you talking about specifically?
The scene in the restaurant with the magazine.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, when he was reading the interview.
Okay. Yeah. That to me is always more reconfirmation. And he keeps kind of reconfirming and reconvincing himself. I mean, you got to remember, he flew to New York with a gun in his suitcase under the plane, So this was, and little known, this is his second trip to New York. He had gone to New York a couple months earlier. If you remember one of the doormen.
He referenced that.
Yes. I was here before. And Jose, played by Jaime Torelli, was like, Hawaii, right? You're here to meet John Lennon,
Yeah.
It's more of an Italian accent. It became less about this possibly a revolt from film school where that's all you have to focus on is let's answer these questions. And the idea was to be more in that moment when the frame is dropping through the camera and we're alone with the character and sitting in the hotel room.
That's what I'm trying to dig into. It's that is a revolt from sort of maybe the more traditional way of doing it.
Let me just jump in with a question here, which maybe Cody is kind of on the same thing. And you talked about a revolt from film school, which I completely understand, by the way.
Yeah.
Mark David Chapman flew to New York with a gun in his bag, and it was his intention to kill John Lennon. Obviously, since he got on the plane in Hawaii, which we don't see.
Right.
What was your thinking behind not showing that moment when he decided to kill him? I know that would be a flashback, and you've talked about that,
right?
But because obviously in traditional filmmaking, in traditional writing, that moment would figure large, and that would be what they were talking about with the magazine. Why did you not want us to experience that?
Matt, can I add on to that? Because a lot of people would think that moment when he reads the magazine is that moment.
That was my interpretation, actually.
Except that we know he's already arrived with the gun.
Yeah.
So that's the issue, Right. So I'm just intrigued because it's such bold storytelling.
Yeah.
Well, any answer, any kind of missed fly ball, I opened the record and saw John is inherently not the full answer, because you got to remember he's convincing himself to do this multiple times throughout the film. And he's also convincing himself to go the other way. So which one matters the most? The first one, the last one, the one in the middle with the magazine, because it's black and white and written, I don't know. The whole, it's kind of like the train wreck in slow motion thing, where you're stuck and you're on pause the whole movie, and you're just watching this guy make this really long decision for 3 days that he's been making for a really long time prior to that he wants but doesn't want, and it becomes cliche to just flash back to do the one thing. And it's not a satisfying answer to me anyway, and it becomes a little bit like cheap in a way, where it's like, oh, this is the reason, and maybe it was because, the scene that I maybe held the longest to on being the best way to do this was with the little people that I mentioned before, this kind of committee in Mark's head populated by like kind of Wizard of Oz, Lilliputian kind of people. And he told them, he had a little people conference and meditating, whatever, how he did it alone in the dark. And he said, listen, I've come up with an idea and I'm going to kill John Lennon. And the little people in his head conferred among each other and came back to Mark and said, we don't think this is a very good idea. This is his psychosis telling him that it's not a good idea. And again, this isn't the origination. The first thought of it is alone in the dark, cross-legged on the carpet, flipping open Sergeant Pepper. But where does it come from before then? There's a suicide attempt in Mark's past. He was in a mental hospital before he ended up in Bellevue. There's, again, Jack Jones wrote a beautiful book, Let Me Take You Down, all about it. And there's no one answer in there. And there's never going to be, and it feels cheap when you see it in other movies, unless I'm sure there's a brilliant version that someone does where you go, oh, that's perfect, like the People versus Larry Flint comes to mind, where he's a bootlegger as a kid, breaking the law to make a little money, and then you see him, doing something that's in bad taste. Oh, I'm guilty of his bad taste, to make a little money as an adult, as a running hustler or whatever. So there's ones where it's like, oh, that's good, that's sharp. Milos Forman, way to go, good for you. Someone's doing it right. But I didn't find that. The closest I came was the little people scene. Had I found the perfect one where that idea flew, and I was like, oh, that's what we got to do. And that idea self-generated itself to keep, and you tell people, and you're like, oh, that's good. When you find the good ideas, you follow them and everything. But that didn't happen here. The good idea was kind of the man with no past. I'm not going to tell you about it. If you want to know about it, I'm going to tell you about this. I'm going to tell you about those 3 days in New York City right around Christmas, which is exactly what The Catcher in the Rye is. On the Upper West Side of Manhattan, too. Yeah. Same part of New York City, right around Christmas.
It's such a bold storytelling choice. I can't help but absolutely love it. And, you mentioned just before we came on, you mentioned that you were kind of an angry young man when you made this.
I did say that.
Yeah. And as someone who also, I was also a very angry young man at the same time. Do you think that writing the script, making the film, do you think that, how much does that owe to kind of a revolt from film school? Both of us went to USC. USC, they teach you a very, I won't say formulaic because it sounds negative, but they have a very, very clear idea of how to teach story. Let's put it that way. Did that? How much of that was a conscious influence in what you were doing?
Well, again, wanting to be more like the elephants of the world, but look, a lot of what I learned in film school shows up in, I think it was Drew Casper, where I first heard form matching content being a good definition for art. I don't know if it's a completely inclusive, covers everything, but when I heard and learned form matches content, that blew my mind in terms of how to write things, and I tried for, there's this great thing in it's a bit controversial now, but, in American Beauty, the Lester Burnham character, right? He dies at the end and he sees his life flash before his eyes, right? And then early on, he's jogging with Scott Bakula and his neighbor, and he loses his wind in front of Wes Bentley and his dad, Chris Cooper, right? And he's like, "Oh, you guys go ahead. My life is flashing before my eyes," which is how the film ends with his life. It's this double meaning in every line. Alan Ball's really good at that, where he gives you a very rich lines that are just kind of like thrown away. And I call it overdetermination, which is something else, but that's the word that I use for it in my own mind. And like when I can create, again, a movie that's not an explanation of the madness, but the madness itself.
Yes.
And like Mark Chapman says, the Paul character, the Judah Freelander character says, talking about Catcher in the Rye, says, well, how does it end? What happens in the end? And Mark Chapman says, well, it doesn't really matter what happens in the end. And then Jarrett does this brilliant thing where he catches himself and kind of thinks and goes, oh, does it matter in the end? And people are telling this character the whole time, I hope you get your autograph. And he does get his autograph. And like every single line would have this form matches content.
Yes.
Mark Chapman is lying in pretty much every time he speaks. He lies to his wife on the phone. Right. And he's not even really from Hawaii. He's from Georgia. At the very end, when Paul's running away, he's like, I'm not really from Hawaii. I'm from Georgia. I'm sorry, I lied to you. Or is that when he finds Paul in the front of the thing at the close to the end, And so you've got this thing that is like drenched in its own madness and drunk on its own madness. And this kind of like self-reflexive form matches content is from film school. And the freak out at the end with all those swing and tilt lenses and the craziness, that's the innermost cave where the hero either changes or fails to change. And I don't know which side of it is which anymore, he's not true to the true spirit of Catcher in the Rye and to the true spirit of fellow humans and the law of the pack, where we don't kill each other, that kind of initial impulse. Like there's other films about how hard it is to kill, how hard it is to cross that line. And that's, Mark Chapman had to work himself into a state, had to work himself into a self-separation state by praying to all the evil beings that he could and signing books and saying goodbye and visiting a prostitute in order to prepare to shoot someone in the back. It is hard. So the innermost cave, and there are lots of elements of film school that I still think about to this day. But in terms of plot point 1, plot point 2, getting at my graph paper, no. To this day, I like a good character. I like to have an idea of the end, and I think about Run Lola Run and what that director, he had an image of his girlfriend with the red hair running through the streets. And that was all he had. And then he got to work, and you keep rereading.
Great movie.
Yeah. And you start from page 1 every time and you make it better each time. And you pick, oh, that was really good what I wrote here. I'm going to bring that in later, and you start to create those motifs and you create that overdetermination where, your film is so true to itself in every line where people can watch it again and just really get intensely into the meaning of everything. You know what I mean? Really let it define itself.
Oh, I love that you said that. That's so
it was actually one of my best teachers at, I don't know if you had Ted Braun.
Did not.
So it's funny because I met up with him for coffee. I don't know about you, but I feel like a lot of people I've spoken to always say that they left USC with lots of regrets about how they didn't do more there, and they felt useless. And I definitely experienced that. For years afterwards, I just felt like I kind of wasted the experience and I hadn't done anything and I hadn't learned anything and I'd written a load of bad scripts. And so I had coffee with Ted Braun, and he told me had this, I started to kind of pour this out like a confession to him about how I feel like I'd fucked up, and he had this like look on his face. And in the end, I just sort of all this regrets were tumbling out of me. And he just said, Matt, stop.
Yeah.
You're not supposed to write a good script to film school. You're not supposed to follow any of the rules that we give you. You're supposed to do your own thing.
Yeah.
You're not supposed to have 3-act structure, 30 plot points and da-da-da. You're just supposed to know that that's one of the ways that you can do it. You're supposed to just write a good script, You're supposed to be a storyteller. And it was like, when I heard that, it just had that was my confession.
I think a lot of people need to hear that. Seriously,
Erik, I totally interrupted you earlier, so I'm sorry. Do you want to? Did you?
No, dude. I totally. I guess I was changing the topic. So in hindsight, so I apologize. No, I apologize. All right.
No, I'm Spartacus.
Listen, I'm English, guys. We apologize for everything. So I'd like to apologize for not apologizing immediately.
Sure.
Okay, I'm sorry.
No worries. I wanted to add on to what Cody was saying about the self-mythologization that was spelled out over the course of this film, because that's actually a topic I've been personally fascinated with for almost 10 years. And you hit so many of what people who do that, whether it be a personal mythology or a politician is trying to build a cult of personality around themselves to like build the hero myth around them so people worship them and so they can have leeway to rule as a tyrant. So just to bring up a couple of them, you get the sense right from the beginning that he believes he is the pure one in a fallen land, that he is the savior that has the divine judgment to decide people's fate. And he considers himself not just a prophet of Holden Caulfield, but a second coming. And you get the sense of this when he hears the gay couple having sex and he's so disgusted that he leaves. He says, "I'm the only normal person in this dump." And then he fully goes over the edge in terms of passing judgment on John Lennon as a phony after he reads the interview in the magazine. And you can tell the catcher in the rye is his Bible by the way he clutches it like it's a holy relic. So I have a couple questions in this vein. Did you do a lot of explicit research into how people build mythologies around themselves and give themselves meaning? Because it's almost stunning the degree of accuracy that this film spells out that process.
I did not research that. I read everything I could read about Mark David Chapman and looked at everything. There's a Barbara Walters Dateline interview that she did. Jarrett actually spoke with Barbara Walters a little bit about it, I remember. There's a E! True Hollywood Story, People Magazine article, and The Last Days of John Lennon by Frederick Seaman, John Lennon's assistant, who's in the movie. That made quite an impression. That's quite a book. Yeah, basically everything that was of the world and of the characters that I could get my hands on, I read. I don't know that I did too much outside psychological stuff. Again, the idea was to make this like very small and about itself and not trying to talk about. I think that could be a mistake that's made sometimes when again, like I said, there was one producer who always kept talking about the Vietnam War and how, and I don't mean to laugh or anything, and she's probably right. That probably was going on in a lot of people's minds or what, but to me, it wasn't about that. It was a stage play, and it was about characters. It was about people. We made it real small. I don't think counting the Dormans, yeah, there's probably a dozen real speaking roles in the movie,
Did you ever get the chance to personally meet and interview Mark David Chapman as preparation?
No one from the film met or spoke to Mark Chapman.
Were you ever interested in doing that?
Well, sure, but it just became, there was a lot of concern, rightly, although I don't know how much it would have mattered really, because people who were going to hate the film hated the film anyway. You know what I mean? That's kind of out of your hands. But that would like be celebritizing and turning it into like a worship thing if.
Sure.
He was actually involved in and then we would have to talk about it because people would ask the question. And it just, the idea was it would be a much kind of safer publicity wise answer to be like, no, we didn't talk to him. He's not involved. And, everything we needed to know was, they had the interview, which I think we may have gotten raw footage from that interview. I remember we definitely had a tape that had like a time code on the bottom of it, and Yeah, Jack Jones definitely met Chapman. He spent many, 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 many hours interviewing Mark Chapman for that book.
And isn't it also the case of, the Mark Chapman of the story is its own, but by this point is its own thing. He's the character.
Right.
And it doesn't really matter.
And the Mark Chapman in 2007 is pretty far disconnected from the 27-year ago Mark Chapman in 1980. So it was easy enough to be like, all right. And I don't even know if that would have been a possibility, if you would attempt to contact, and if that would even be, I don't know. I remember reading that in the Jack Jones book that Chapman had like he gets a lot of letters, not fan mail, but mail, right? So, and there, I forget what he had classifications for the letters, and one of them was sincere and the other one was semi-sincere. And I always love the idea that Mark would read these letters and think, oh, this person's semi-sincere. And then some of the letters are very, very angry. And some of them are in the Jack Jones book. And there was a woman who wrote him and talked about how he's never going to get laid again because he's of a sick mind. Only she's much more graphic than that about what he's not going to be able to do again because he's of a sick mind. And so I forget the label on the files that Chapman keeps on his letters for. And he keeps all his letters. He rarely writes back. But so, I think it was talked about briefly that, we should write him a letter and maybe we'll make the semi-sincere folder or something, but it just, it was then agreed upon that that was a bad idea,
So funny.
Did he publicly react to the movie like Yoko Ono did?
No, not that I know of. I do remember that quote that Yoko said, and I think that's a brilliant quote. Are you talking about, she said something like, look what John and I started, now everyone's doing their own thing? Yeah. That was, I adore Yoko Ono. I love her art. I love her book, Grapefruit. The Play It by Trust piece is great. And she planted some trees, and I've in the early show that John Lennon, where they met, where he talks about the magnifying glass hooked up to the ceiling. Yeah, nothing but just wow in the terms of what Yoko Ono has created and her music. I have a Yoko Ono record, not Blueprint for the Sunrise. I have another one. I can't remember the title of it, but there's Adam Yauch is on. There's a remix on it. It's a pretty cool record.
We are running a little long on time here, so we should probably...
Okay, I just got one more. I got a couple more sort of script questions. Can you just talk about just the dramatic function of the Lindsay Lohan character, Jude? What was your intention for her character in the story?
Well, Jude Stein is a real person who was really there and really had lunch with Mark Chapman. So she's not an invention. A lot of people, that's an early on question that clearly, but to me, it was the yin and yang. That was the good side of Beatlemania. That was the good side of, celebrity dom, wherein, she talks about not really waiting up close to the building. And sometimes it's better if you wait and you see him coming out of the coffee shop, and, it reminds you that he's real, and she was sort of like the best version of the fan, and like the light and the heart and the polite and the unironic and the very connected with reality, relationship with how to be a fan and how to wait outside of John Lennon's house in a way that's kind of cool, like she'd go into the city, see a movie, wait for a little while, meet people. That was like a meeting place, meet you at the Dakota, and maybe you see Gilda Radner, maybe you see Roberta Flack, maybe you see John Lennon, and you don't even really need an autograph.
Sure.
One of the, since we're on the topic, because this is one of the things I want to talk about too, is that Eric and I have this term that we talk about all the time that was coined by T.S. Eliot, the objective correlative.
Sure.
I don't know if are you familiar with that
familiar.
term? Awesome. So we won't explain it to our audience a million times, so we won't define it again. So, and it felt like she was in many ways an embodied objective correlative.
Interesting.
In the sense that there was kind of the larger drama of the film was kind of encapsulated in microcosm in his interactions with her. And she kind of provided this vehicle through which we could see a lot of the struggles that he was going through, and those could become externalized.
Well, any opportunity you have to get into that territory that like that overdetermined territory where he's talking about the big questions just by saying, when Jude says, I want to go to Hawaii, and he says, no, you have to say it. Right. Say you go to Hawaii. You have to make up your mind to do it. Well, when we hear that, hopefully we're hearing that he's trying to do that to himself so that he can do this thing that he wants to do. So have you heard it's bad, I don't really think about it, but ear trumpet, where there's a character that's just for like, it's the character that like, after some plot points have happened, the main character runs into them and retells what has just happened so the audience can make. Yeah. So,
yeah, that's the worst.
But when a guy who can't tell the truth and talk about himself has the ability to talk and can speak in these lies, like a lot of people you meet and they tell you about their wife like 5 seconds into the conversation, oh, my wife's in my, whatever. Chapman doesn't tell his wife anyone that says he's married or, barely from Hawaii, and when he calls his wife, he is lying the whole time about why he's there and lies about his Bible being on his bedside, yeah, I mean, sure. I see what you're saying about Jude being a mirror but then the whole world is, the whole world for us all. Like talk about like reality creation and how we like, create our own destiny, reality, whatever it is. Like that's like constantly happening as like humans. We're making choices that bounce around and bounce back, and we're getting the feedback loop and confirmation or not confirmation, and it's the other writer that I talked about a little bit before doing this. He was talking about gun control and things like this, and somehow we got to the notion where like if you're gonna stab someone, it's a bit harder to like stab someone to death. You have to like kind of make this horrible decision again and again and again. And with a gun, you just have to like do it the once. So, it's if Mark Chapman had been able to connect to like, play the tape forward and really see how it was going to feel on the other side of killing someone, or if like, I'm sure it must have felt just horrible, I always talked about how I pulled the fire alarm when I was a kid. I was in the library. I was like 5, 6 years old or something like that. And the fire alarm said pull on it. I don't even really remember thinking that it was a fire alarm and that I shouldn't pull it, but it said pull and I wanted to pull it and I pulled it. And then the fire alarm started going off and I just started feeling worse and worse that I had done something wrong. And someone opened a door and like poked their head out to see if it was, and someone walked up to me because I was standing next to the fire alarm that had been pulled looking guilty and said, "Did you pull the fire alarm?" And I was like, "Yes," and like, there I was, I'd done wrong and I was in it. And like, but that was the thing. I hadn't connected it all the way through and known that if I pulled that, an alarm would go off and there would be consequences. Oh, my mother was so mad. And I'm banned from that library for life. So the story goes or whatever. But like, I remember that ride home. My mom is not a yeller and she definitely yelled at me on the way home from pulling the fire alarm.
If it's cool with everybody, I'm going to kind of move us along here so we can kind of get everything in. Does anybody else want to have anything to say on that topic?
I have just one quick question. When you do research into these larger than life figures, sometimes it becomes easy to buy into the mythology. Like I had a big Chairman Mao phase when I was in college. I did a lot of research into him, and you sort of like start to reinforce the myth in your brain. Did you ever get sucked into the Chapman myth? Like that he is the catcher in the rye, that type of thing? Or were you able to separate that?
No, not so much. I never really thought that it was any kind of that the synchronicities were just synchronicities, and everything happens in Manhattan. You walk down the street and you have like three different things that they're all amazing and huge that all happened at this coffee shop, and that you know what I mean? Like it's in I Heart Huckabees. Coincidences are not always meaningful. I know I never did buy into it, but I think the thing that made the biggest journey was this notion that Mark Chapman did it to be famous. That's kind of the quick sentence that everyone says if they talk about Mark Chapman wanted to be famous, so he shot John Lennon. And that devolved and kind of expanded, and it became, I'm not saying that is not true. He did, if John Lennon was nobody, like a phony down the street that pissed him off, I don't know that he would do it. He definitely wanted to get everyone's attention and know it, but it is in a much more complex, self-loathing way. Back to something you were saying earlier, Erik, about, building themselves up, and I'm the embodiment, and becoming, the God and the prophet and things. After he gets off the phone call with his wife, the voiceover is, I just wanted to kill myself. I just felt so shitty. I wanted to just throw myself off the building right then and there. So there is even that like backpedaling yin and yang counterbalance to like, oh yeah, I'm a prophet. I'm going to do great things. I'm going to show the world how phony everybody is. But I feel like a piece of shit too. He could not ignore that as well.
Yeah, he even says earlier that he's cracked and broken and you have to find someone to fix you. Just to wrap up the point, the ultimate thing that derails his mythology is, I think you alluded to this earlier, Jarrett, that if you actually read the book Catcher in the Rye, that idea is that he's standing in a wheat field catching children from harm and protecting them. Whereas that totally doesn't jive with the action that he was doing. The only thing that really matched up in terms of the book in his life, which he kept repeating over and over again, is like, this book also was 3 days in New York, ended in a mental institution. And he would consciously try to make his life mirror Holden's, like when he hired the hooker, but he proved he was a phony when he actually slept with the hooker, cheating on his wife. So yeah, I totally agree. At the end, he was perhaps the ultimate phony.
It's so true about how he's selectively picking what he wants from The Catcher in the Rye, and murdering someone because they're a phony is a gross perversion, and and I see what he's getting. There is an anger within Holden Caulfield, and there is a little bit of violence, if I'm remembering right. That there are some violent fantasies, whether it's about the pimp who steals his money or something. But then I think there's also violent fantasies directed toward Holden. It's been a while since I've read it, but I would say that there is, there is some kind of dark and graphic stuff in there for a bit. I think maybe the people who write FU, he thinks about like wanting to hurt them or something, but for the most part, not at all. Holden's very gentle.
Yeah, I mean, not wanting to be like a terrible, sort of film critic type person. I mean, isn't the violence in The Catcher in the Rye really about? Isn't it brought out with just the conflict that's clearly going on inside Holden's head?
Sure. Yeah.
And I mean, he's just not a happy young man, obviously.
Yeah, very great depiction of the young adult mind, The Catcher in the Rye is.
Yeah, and of the time too, I think. Yeah. Oh, go ahead, Matt.
No, I was just going to say, obviously J.D. Salinger's a bit of a genius. Yeah.
Yeah, I love 9 stories. No, not even 9 stories. The other one that
Seymour
Franny and
Glass.
Zooey. No, Franny and Zooey.
Franny and Zoe. That's it. And he wrote obviously his short stories are just masterpieces.
Yeah.
I mean
and then there's Raise High the Roof Beams as well, and that's kind of it. That's all there is.
Yeah.
Okay, I'm going to pivot us if that's cool.
Go for it.
So one of the other challenges, I think, of this movie, and this is a little bit of a broader challenge in the sense that other movies have this challenge too, but is that it's a movie where you know the ending. Mm-hmm. So right away at the beginning, you know how it's going to end. I mean, if you know anything about history. So there's obviously something that's inherently anti-dramatic about that. So that's a problem we have to solve as a writer. It's like, how do I make sure that there's drama here and even though we know the ending in some sense. And I think you use some very specific techniques to solve that problem. But before I say what the technique, what I think I identified, maybe you can tell me if you went in with that mind and if you were employing specific techniques, because maybe you'll talk about some that I didn't even think of.
Well, right. You get that question a lot, or I got that question a lot, and people would be like, we do know the ending. We know that he shoots John Lennon. Mm-hmm. The big thing was playing it entirely on Mark. There was another film about Mark David Chapman, same year, shot at the same time, shot at the Dakota as well. I think it's called The Assassination of John Lennon. And, there are parts that I definitely admire about that film. I saw it in New York. I had wanted to see it, got to some kind of early screening of it. And they go back to Hawaii, and there is some past stuff and stuff with Gloria, and there are parts of that movie that are very, very good. But they are kind of in a medium wide. They kind of have that when in the moment of, you know what I mean? You see it from the side and the full gunshot, and I think you see a bit more of John Lennon, and that was not the idea. I mean, we did kind of get that coverage, but it was never the idea to do that as any kind of like action sequence. If you know what I mean. It wasn't. It was meant to be. Here's a guy. This is him committing to making a decision. It's so easy to pull a trigger, but sometimes it's not easy, obviously. But like it should be a lot harder because he regrets it instantly. The second he gets feedback, I mean, so that's the big one, to kind of handle it in a very intimate, very human way, as opposed to in like more of a cinematic or movie way. Most people don't know that he got John Lennon's autograph. Mm. So that was, you occasionally you hear that, oh, make a movie about John Lennon, whatever. He got his autograph, right? Yeah, he did. How did this cool that you know that, whatever. So you do get the benefit of these two characters crossing paths and it not happening. And people are like, wait, what? Right. In terms of form matching content and like it being the madness and not there's something really interesting that I want to share where Mark Chapman is in Jared Leto playing Mark Chapman is in almost every single shot in this movie. And when he's having a conversation with someone and it is the other character's shot, he is dirtying the frame. His head and shoulder or whatever will be on the corner of that frame in the over the shoulder shot. But no one dirties his frame. When it's his side of the conversation, he is alone because it's his story told by himself and his madness and his psychosis, right? The only time that someone dirties a Mark Chapman shot is when it's John Lennon getting the autograph. So this one real person, this one honest interaction where he said he wants this thing, and John sees him. John says, "Is there anything else you want?" And I've had people come up to him and said, hey, how do you know that he really said that? I mean, it is in the Jack Jones book, but there's also something remarkable in the Frederick Seaman book where John Lennon has been famous since he was like 17 or 18, right? He's been dealing with crowds and with fans for a very long time. And he would go to restaurants and just by the way people were knowing, he'd be like, oh, those people are going to come over in about 5 minutes and ask for an autograph. Those people are going to start talking really loudly and laughing really loudly as though they don't need a famous rock star at their table to have a good time. And he knew that what it was to be a celebrity and how people were going to react. So he's looking at this guy who's getting his autograph back, holding his pen and looking at him as though he wants something else. Is there anything else you want? And so people, even if they know he got his autograph, don't know that there's this nice, honest John Lennon who looks at him and says, what more can I, you know what I mean? Do you want a picture? You know what I mean?
Right.
And so that's surprising. And there is that.
That's a really interesting extra thing below the surface. Yeah.
And see, there is that moment of like, am I watching an alternate history? Is this suddenly like, it's after the film, but like Inglourious Bastards where we get to see Hitler die or something, is he not going to kill him? Is this what's going on? So there's that element that's going for, but really the answer is to, and it's the opening footage that, there was such less of a media-drenched world. The opening footage of "We Have Arrested Mark David Chapman from Hawaii for the murder of John Lennon" begins the film and ends the film. And the idea is, well, we know that going in. You know what I mean? So you say it right away. We know why these two people's names are connected. Mark Chapman murdered John Lennon. But then when you hear it again, you see that exact same footage again. "We have arrested Mark David Chapman of Hawaii from murdering John Lennon." You perhaps know a little bit more, or hopefully feel a little bit more, rather. You know, that we tied ourselves to the mast and we'd sailed close to the devil.
Absolutely.
Or not not the devil, but someone who did something, you know.
Yeah, because it's almost like, in fact, you're not even trying to avoid the fact that people are going to know what happens at the end of the story. You're actually just putting it front and center.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, you couldn't avoid it.
Is it still, I'm not as in tune with celebrity culture as I used to be. Is it still kind of as dark and mean-spirited as it used to be in terms of, Gawker and things like this?
My guess is that it's more mean-spirited.
Really?
Yeah, because with this movie obviously came out, it's funny, Facebook became a big thing in 2007, and this movie came out right before that.
This is true.
So in a way, it was way ahead of its time, right? And I think that actually now, because of social media and because of this thing called trolling and all of this stuff, I actually think we're in this is just my personal position, we're in a much darker place for that kind of thing. I mean, people commit suicide because of stuff people write about them on the internet. I think that, if you're a celebrity, if you're anyone who's even if you're not a celebrity, you run the risk of public censure.
I feel,
Twitter also came out, I believe, in 2007, and kind of has become the epitome of internet hatred and disgracing people.
Yeah, and I feel like, it's interesting because, Mark Chapman shot John Lennon. Now you can just go onto Twitter or Instagram or whatever and just write some really dark shit about someone and send it off because you've had a bad day. Because they're public access.
Back in the day, you had to fly to New York.
You had to fly to New York.
So much harder.
Get a hotel room, get your gun ready, and just kill someone. Now you can just open your laptop and just
These kids have it easy these days.
Yeah, they don't know how hard it used to be.
I know.
They have no idea.
So the playing field's been leveled a bit, and we've
no, absolutely, because that's the basis of celebrity culture now, is the accessibility of people in the public eye. You just have to find their profile and send them a message. I mean, the world has changed utterly since the early 2000s at a bewildering speed.
And as an interesting kind of closing of the chapter to this celebrity era, because obviously celebrities are still getting disgraced left and right. I think I saw more than one article with the title something like "The Downfall of Joss Whedon," who was a beloved figure just
he's been Me Too now, right?
Yes. Yeah, he had many allegations of misconduct. But the Free Britney movement might be a watershed moment because people treated her like public property when, in hindsight, it was quite obvious she was having mental health issues publicly. But people were just so cruel, and now we're seeing an upswing. And Lindsay Lohan's story had a similar arc, and I'm wondering if we're going to see free Lindsay. I mean, she's not in a conservatorship, but some sort of redemption story, we're going to see her more often.
Well, Joss Whedon I have less sympathy with because he made the movie that ruined the Aliens franchise, in my humble opinion.
I thought John Logan made Alien. Are you not talking about Alien Covenant?
No, I'm talking about number 4. Funny story, because one thing Jarrett and I agree on really profoundly is that Alien 3 is a masterpiece.
It's great.
A subject of a coffee shop conversation before
You should
Christmas.
have us back on Storytelling Deconstructed.
Jarrett, we need to do Alien 3, okay? Because we both maintain. I mean, that is a true undiscovered modern classic.
First of the franchise that I saw it with a kid with my mom. I was like on HBO or whatever it was on. When you watch movies beginning to end, here we're and it was fantastic.
Alien 3. Have you seen, Jarrett? Have you seen the extended cut?
No.
So it's really interesting, not to digress, but it actually opens with Charles Dance's character walking along the shore of the of the ocean, and you see how gigantic the abandoned prison where the movie takes place is. It's incredible, absolutely amazing. And you see all the construction cranes lying dormant. It's really excellent. So
I may watch it tonight.
Cody, Charles Dance played Tywin Lannister.
Exactly. Charles Dance, by the way, a wonderful actor, truly wonderful actor.
Oh yeah, he's awesome. I actually have not seen Aliens 3, so I
So
don't.
Wait, which one?
Alien Cubed, right? Yeah.
The Alien I'm talking about is that Joss Whedon did the Alien movie that took place right. Obviously, Alien 3 is a very controversial film because David Fincher had such a bad reputation at the time with the studio, and in hindsight, I think it's a masterpiece. And I enjoyed it at the time too. But Joss Whedon took the franchise in a far more studio friendly direction to its detriment, I think, as one person. Anyway.
Can I just, Cody, were you done with your point? Because I want to add on to it, and I want to just make sure you're not still.
You mean what we were talking about a long time ago?
Yeah, we were talking about a long time about knowing the ending's going to happen.
Oh, Jarrett hit on what the main thing I wanted to talk about, which is that he used this technique of like a pump, like you did a couple of them. I mean, there was the main big one, but like a couple pump fakes, essentially, where there was a kind of a fake out, and maybe people who are not super familiar with exactly how the story went down, they might think, oh, this is the moment it's going to happen. Then it doesn't happen. Oh, maybe this is it. And it doesn't happen. There's a couple of those. I mean, obviously there's the big one, which is where he gets the autograph. So yeah, I mean, I guess that just puts the cap on, I guess.
Sure.
Yeah.
And just to add on to that, besides those being plot suspense moment where you're like, oh, where you're thinking this is the moment it's going to happen, and then it isn't. And that happens so many times. Those are also character moments because it lets you know he had a lot of chances to turn down his destiny.
That's right.
He had so many chances. And I think one of the huge turning points was when he says to Lindsay Lohan's character, like, you got to say that you're going to do it. And then when he's on, I think this is when he's on the phone with his wife, he whispers into the phone after she hangs up, I'm going to kill John Lennon. Yeah, that's the moment. And then,
it's a very powerful moment.
Even still, when John Lennon signs the thing and you're thinking, this is the moment, he doesn't do it. And it's like he has that last chance before he makes that bet with the devil. And that's the final moment, the final crossing point. So that really answers the question, why did he do this? I mean, just even if not explicitly, just an embodied drama where it's just like, I have to do it or else I'm like no one. I'm not the catcher in the rye. I'm not the prophet. I'm just a loser. I'm the loser who was from Georgia and now lives in Hawaii.
Yeah. Cool. Well,
that's everything I have.
Gentlemen, does this feel like a natural end? Does anybody else have anything they want to say?
Honestly, like if I had to just say one thing, just overall, I feel like, Jarrett, your movie came out really, if we're talking about film and TV history, at a moment where independent film was kind of passing the baton to TV. Because I feel like by the year 2010, 2011, 2012, everything was about TV and people just weren't making. I mean, Chapter 27 is a movie that's absolutely has the boldest, most unique vision. And rewatching that makes me really appreciate how different this movie is. How in no moment do you dilute that vision that you had as the director. And I feel like just, historically, by only a few years after the movie, storytelling had kind of shifted over to TV. And the kind of movies that were being made are these, like, excuse me for trolling or whatever, but these asinine superhero driven blockbusters.
Yes.
Where if it's not part of the Star Wars franchise or some superhero, they just weren't being made. And I feel like that's what makes this movie stick out for me, is that it was one of the last of the breed.
Yeah, I just want to say, Jarrett, as a final comment, this movie was really ahead of its time in terms of subject matter.
Seriously.
And I think perhaps the world now is ready to see this movie in a way it was not in 2007. I think this is going to be the decade of the Mark David Chapman-like person. They're going to be the figures that we learn about in history class in 2050 about this decade. And your film is a psychological portrait of what it means to be that person. We need to understand the Unabomber. We need to understand Jim Jones. We need to understand the Columbine perpetrators. And I think this movie is going to go up there in terms of, because like Breaking Bad has a similar arc, but it's fiction. And I think your movie is going to stand up with like The Last King of Scotland, or I don't know if you guys saw the recent miniseries Waco, which I thought was fantastic. And
very good.
Your film is in that lineage, and the world is ready now to see it.
Well,
I highly recommend everyone who is listening to this, if you have not seen this movie, go see this movie.
Oh yeah, I'm going to add that to the intro. By the way, we're going to put a link to the film.
Just to speak to that, now with social media, everyone can be Mark David Chapman in the privacy of their own home.
That's
and honestly, if you haven't seen this movie, I looked for it online last night, and it's available on 5 different streaming platforms.
That should be what you just said should be the advertising campaign of Twitter. You can be Mark David Chapman in the privacy of your own home.
Cool.
No, that's tremendously insightful, Matt, and Erik and Cody. Thank you too. It's such a pleasure to be able to talk about the movie in such a smart way. And so, thank you again. It's a pleasure to be here.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you so much for being here, man.
Thanks so much for coming on, Jarrett.
This was awesome. Yeah, so what I'm going to do is I'll put a link to everybody can watch this movie for free on YouTube, so you have no excuse not to watch it. Watch the hell out of it. Watch it 4 times. And because there's something, you'll see something new on every watch. It's one of those movies. It's so deep. Thank you so much for being here, both of you guys, Jarrett and Matt. Matt, it was awesome to have you. You guys are both welcome anytime.
Dude, it's always a pleasure.
Okay. Yeah.
Let's wrap it up like this. Is there anything, I mean, we're not the biggest podcast in the world, but is there anything that we can shout out? Is there anything any other projects that you got out? Anything you're working on? Anything you want to just talk about?
No, I mean, I am writing again at a pretty high serious level. I was working on it this morning. I'm on page 87, I think.
Nice.
And it's been a long time. I definitely took about a 4-year break from even screenwriting, and then to think about like screenwriting at the level of like, showing a couple people what I have and like really thinking, but I don't want to, we can talk about it more off mic if you want. But I mean, in terms of like saying my last name and stuff and what chapter 27 is about, and in terms of like fame seeking in my own right, I'm not that person anymore.
No, I don't get that sense.
I mean, yeah. But so it's nice to be on the other side. And yeah, I took a multiple mental health years for a break to figure out who I am and everything else. And it's just you think about all these strange careers in Hollywood where people get discovered in their 40s or like don't, or like have these just interesting and I'm just happy to be where I'm at, enjoying writing again, and that people read what I show them, the beginnings of it, like it, and be great to be talking about the first film. Such nice things are said that I can finally like have the ears to hear it, and like don't hate myself as much internally to like be like, why are you lying to me? But so no, thank you again, and thank you, Matt.
Oh, well, actually, I would like to make a shout out if that's okay.
Okay, Matt wants to.
No one asked you, mate.
Proceed.
I would like to shout out. So Jarrett and I both went to USC, and I would like to shout out to all the great teachers that I had, not just at USC, but in life. Because I think that as a writer, as an anybody, teachers are the people that really shape you and give you the courage to be who you are. I definitely had some absolutely great ones.
Awesome. Wow. Yeah. Cool. I thought you were actually
shamelessly plug. That's what you thought.
Yeah, I thought this was going to be a plug.
No. I neither am I the kind of person who wants to publicize myself.
Well, yeah, awesome.
Actually, thinking about it, I would.
All right.
I actually was never one of those writers that like to work in coffee shops. I always thought that was rather cliche. But over the last couple of years, I have actually started working in a coffee shop. And I'd like to give a shout out to the owner of that coffee shop, who's a music expert plays the best music, and actually told me all about Double Fantasy and John Lennon, etc., etc. And I was thinking about it a lot, obviously, while we were getting this podcast together. So this is a shout out to Julio, who's the owner of Street Level Cafe in Echo Park, which I have to tell you is the best coffee shop in an area saturated with incredibly pretentious, really depressing coffee shops full of people writing scripts. So I'm happy to be one of those people at Julio's place. So it's a shout out to him. So do visit Street Level Cafe on Glendale Boulevard if you're ever in Echo Park.
Okay, awesome, perfect. Yeah, Street Level Cafe. Check it out. All right, cool. Well, I think that's probably said it all. Thank you, everybody, for listening.
Thank you, guys.
Thanks for being here. All right.
Yeah. Thanks, guys. Jarrett, it's great to see you.
Always great, man.
All right.
Yeah, let's hang soon.
Absolutely.